Hello there, and welcome to Off the Drawing Board, the official Sheffield University Architecture Society podcast. I'm Daphne, and today we are delighted to welcome Hannah Wolowacz to our studio. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hannah is also a student here at the University of Sheffield School of Architecture and Landscape, and today we begin a new series of mini episodes for our podcast. This will be a series of presentations or discussions of specific books and their correlation to architecture. Hannah will be talking about an interesting book today, which was released not too long ago. But before we begin, Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself first and talk to us about your architectural journey so far?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm in my final year of my architectural masters at University of Sheffield. I started my architecture journey at the University of Nottingham for my part one, which was really great, but COVID hit in my second year, went on through my third year, and I graduated during COVID as well. So I was so happy to be going into my master to have a bit of a redo. And then I worked in practice for about a year and a half in Manchester, doing mostly healthcare, which was pretty intense, but also really good. So many rules in healthcare. Oh my gosh, it kind of kills your creativity a little bit. I was really drawn to Sheffield because of how interactive the course seemed. I mean, I loved the idea of live projects, and I thought, oh my God, I've been sat behind a screen designing windowless offices for how long? I am ready to get out there and just be a bit more engaged as an architect. And I think that's kind of led me to what I'm interested in now. It's like how are architects a bit more part of their community instead of sat away in their little offices, siloed off from the rest of the world. And it kind of leads a bit into my book that I'll be talking about as well. Yeah, maybe that's why I loved it so much.
This is a wonderful transition, I think, and it's also lovely to hear that people are actually interested in joining the University of Sheffield because, as you said, it does have some very specific aspects of the course that make it what it is really. It makes it really special. So that's great to have you here, Hannah, and thank you for joining us in the studio today. Now, Hannah, you're going to be talking to us about Babel, a novel by Rebecca Kuang, which was released in 2022. And from what I see, the book is quite successful, as it was voted by Daily Mail as the best book of 2022, as well as being finalist for Waterstone's Book of the Year and Blackwell's Book of the Year. So, would you like to tell us a bit about the book? What is this book about?
Dang, I didn't know that it had gotten so many awards. I mean, I'm not shocked, to be honest. It's a great book. But yes, the book follows the journey of a man called Robin who grew up in Canton and his mother dies of cholera. And so he's brought to England by an academic who kind of takes him almost like a ward, almost like a son, but their relationship is explored. A bit tenuous and all that. And it's centred around the Tower of Babel, which is like a fictional tower, maybe fictional, we don't know, mythological we'll call it, which, I mean, if you haven't heard of it, it's well known as being like a centre of knowledge in history, and I think maybe God thought that humanity had gotten a bit too close to having ultimate knowledge, and so split humanity into all of their different languages so that they couldn't understand each other anymore. So it's all about that, but as a parallel universe, if the Tower of Babel was in Oxford in England during its peak of empire, and so the main character Robin enters the Tower of Babel and becomes a translator, and at first he's super into it, really into the philosophy of it, all the meanings, and he makes a really good group of friends there. But in time he comes to realise the part that the tower has to play in the British Empire and his part to play in colonialism. It's all about the ethics of academics and the hidden labour behind colonialism and revolution, I guess. And it's really good. It made me think a lot about my part to play as an academic and my ethical responsibility. And the Tower of Babel itself is like a really cool architectural figure in the story. And it's mentioned a lot in great detail. And it made me think a lot about the Arts Tower as well. I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's an academic in a tower getting really obsessed in his course without being able to have time for anything else. That sounds a bit familiar.
That is an interesting point that you're bringing up. So obviously us students, we are involved in academia in a very different way from academics, but at the same time, we are the ones who really get the impact of how academics teach. And you can see that throughout the time by the way that people are getting taught, especially in architecture, where we were used to having this academia of the star architect and how to create buildings that change as time passes with history. You see the different changes that are imposed on the way that we learn architecture. So how does this book correlate to that? Do you want to say in more detail?
Sure. The part that really kind of resonated with me was when Robin was, I think he was maybe in his second or third year of studying at Babel, and he's really kind of engrossed in his course and really getting into it and doesn't have time for anything else. Is sort of aware of his privilege in that way that, he can be completely engrossed in his course and not have to worry about housing and food and where it's coming from, and he just doesn't have time to even think about these things. And it kind of made me think about studying architecture. You get so wrapped up in just the course itself and the deadlines and the magic of it all that you get, excited that maybe you could change the world and make your mark on it, and you disconnect from the outside world. And the book really kind of digs into this as like a sort of cause. The reason why colonialism has endured for so long, that we all get so caught up in our own little bubbles and our own little worlds that we don't realise the wider effects, and we don't understand all of the complicated networks that make colonialism work. And the part that you're playing in it, you don't realise where you are in the system. I guess that's why it kind of really cut to my core, and I thought, oh God, what am I doing? Am I doing enough?
This is a really big part of architecture. I think it's really often that we see people just indulged in their design or indulge in their own ideas of architecture, that you don't really see the bigger image. And that's really dangerous for a profession like architecture, which is supposed to be really social. It is supposed to involve a whole lot of people and different networks, as you mentioned, and not just one individual designing their own ideas or one individual experiencing architecture in just their own specific way, which is actually quite good that we have studio culture in the University of Sheffield and in other universities in the UK. It is a very big part of how we teach architecture. So have a studio where you need to interact and do group projects with other students, where you need to see other things, get out of your bubble and not necessarily restrict to the things you learn from academia. Sometimes academics, whether they do it deliberately or not, they might not give us as many stimuli as we would need to get out of this bubble. It is really difficult to get out of your own little world when you are doing architecture and you're trying to make a design.
Yeah.
As you said, you want to have impact, you want it to have a meaning for the world and have something positive come out there. But at the same time, you do want your own ideas presented in some way that you find enjoyable. So my question would be, have you ever felt that you're stuck in a loop in one of your architectural projects during your part 1 or part 2?
Oh, 100%, all the time. I think any major project, it's very easy to get really caught up in your design and the speed of doing architecture. It's just, review after design meeting, working in studio. You're really caught up in that academic world of architecture that the rest of the world just fades away. I've met so many people and, you ask them, oh, what are you doing tonight? What are you doing for your weekend? What do you do outside of architecture? And they're like, nothing, sleeping, and more architecture. And it completely fills your world. You just have no time and no energy or space for anything else. And that's what sucks you into that bubble. You come to realise, I especially realised in live projects, the value of getting other people's opinions and working with others outside of that silo of architecture, because it's such a limiting area. Really interesting, but quite siloed and in its own little circle. And Babel really looks at that, about being in that world of academia that's very philosophical. It really expands your mind, but you're completely disconnected from the actual realities, and it can be really uncomfortable facing those realities and what the actual effects if you draw a line on paper, what are the actual real world effects? Who's building that wall? What is it separating? It made me really wonder whether being an academic was even a good thing at all at points. It's definitely something that I value in Sheffield as a university, that always thinking about their place decolonially and always trying to reach out and look outside of architecture, and they're always questioning that. So that gave me a little bit of comfort when I was reading. That helped a bit.
Especially in an environment where architecture needs to be multidisciplinary and include as many things as possible in order to make your design successful. You would rather need to get out of that loop rather than try to be in your bubble and not look at anything else, really. So it is a very big issue when we're discussing about architecture students who are usually really into their project and cannot have time for themselves, or they cannot also experience other things apart from architecture. So it is a big danger, and it does kind of of change the idea of what academia is and how we can promote it in a specific way that will allow architecture students and architecture professionals be good at what they do, and at the same time not be stuck up, not be viewing just one side of things and one side of their design or the possibilities of a project. So that's a great point. And it is a bit scary that you mentioned that Babel Tower. It does remind you of the Arts Tower. It makes us question, are we really like Robin? Are we so enclosed in our projects? Are we not seeing anything outside of academia? I do think that Sheffield is quite good, as you mentioned, in expanding our horizons. But after some point, it's not just what the academics do to get us out of the loop, but rather what we as architecture students do in order to expand what we see and what architecture is for us. Do you have anything to comment on that?
When I was reading Babel and making those comparisons, Babel itself is more of a symbol. You know, it's constantly described and referred to in the book. So when I was reading Babel and making those comparisons between the Tower of Babel and the Arts Tower, I mean, the tower itself, the Tower of Babel, it changes throughout the book. At the very beginning, it's the circle of Robin's world and he can see nothing else. It's only translation. It's only this world of academia. And the tower itself is almost like a tool of the British Empire as a way to isolate those academics from, I guess, the ramifications of the work that they're doing. And then Robin leaves the tower and he goes back to Canton. But yeah, he goes back and he sees the effects of the work that he's doing. And he kind of understands those structures that are put in place. And by the end of the book, the tower becomes one of his tools for dismantling that structure of decolonialism. And yeah, making those comparisons, I was thinking, it's always brought up in the Arts Tower by the staff that it feels isolating and you're in this like gilded tower above the rest of Sheffield and kind of separated off from everyone else, and even separated across studios. We don't really interact much with the undergraduates, and we're always trying to find ways, can we bring to us families or, swapping projects, and it's really great that we're encouraging that cross-contamination. Then with live projects reaching out. But yeah, I guess the nature of a tower is isolating and it's kind of proud. It's a symbol.
We do know it as a symbol in the architecture school. We are talking about all the other schools of Sheffield University, and then it's the Arts Tower.
Yeah.
Oh, that's where the architects are.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be like that necessarily.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, in Babel, it's the Tower of Babel. It's the symbol of empire and the symbol of, well, for them, they have this magic system of silver, and the tower itself is completely filled with silver. Like, the bricks itself are even made of silver. So it's literally almost gilded. It's silvered. It's a whole symbol of the wealth of empire. And the Arts Tower is kind of a symbol of the uni's architectural stamp on the city, I guess. It's so iconic. It's almost the tallest thing in all of Sheffield. Maybe not for much longer with the Fargate Tower, I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely a landmark, and that can be very divisive. And it's also been used last year, I think. I don't know if you heard about this, but last year the Arts Tower was occupied right at the beginning of term because it's that big of a symbol that once you take over the Arts Tower, somebody has to listen, right? And it's really the same in the book as well. The symbol of the tower got me thinking about our power as academics and our ethical responsibility as academics and as future designers of the world, the responsibility and the power that we have in whose voices are heard and who we're designing for and things like that. It's really highlighted that aspect of designing and that aspect of being at a university and having the privilege to spend all of my time just in my brain and thinking.
It is important to acknowledge that architecture is not just what we build, but architecture is how we get it taught, how we present it, and how we get younger people, so student level, to engage with it, which is the only thing that will make it advance and change at some point. As it has always been with history, architecture would never change if we just followed the academic rules that were imposed in the beginning of our journey. I think it's really interesting that this book is actually a novel and it is not directly correlated to architecture, but brought up such interesting points about the way that we engage with it in academia and the way that we are able to design as students. Thank you very much, Hannah, for bringing this book in with us today. It's been a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Oh, thank you for having me. Clearly, I just bring architecture into everything, even the stuff I read.
As architecture students, it is important to find our school in bits and pieces of every day. So thank you very much. And remember, if you have an interesting book to talk about in the field of architecture and are a part of Sheffield School of Architecture, you can participate in our podcast as well. By contacting SSoAL in our social media, you can come to the studio and tell us about what you have been reading. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you all at the next episode.